Hello, everyone, and welcome to Serious Writer on September the 4th, 2024. I'm Kyle, and I'll be talking with you about industry updates. Industry updates for this fall, 2024. We come at a weird time because we just had summer, which is kind of the slow season, the doldrum season for submissions. And then we had about 2 weeks where editors were kind of back in office. I got less out of office replies. And then we hit Labor Day weekend, which pretty much last week, everybody was out of office. So, and that was fine. And so I'm waiting to this week till we could finally get some submissions out. And the reason being, if you weren't on the call last week, I went to Nashville for Killer Nashville. It was a great conference and over 500 authors and a great awards ceremony. It was really, if you write anything in the mystery, thriller, suspense, true crime genres, that's the conference to go to. It's an epic conference. And so I went there, but I also met with HarperCollins Nashville. I met with Hachette Nashville, and I met with Lifeway there in Nashville editors. I had about 5 hours of meetings with editors. It was awesome. I loved it. But one of the reasons why it's hard to get editors is they're not all working in office. And so at HarperCollins, they said I was the first agent they've met with since COVID. So first one that's been to their offices since COVID. And then I went to Hachette, and she was like, I don't really meet with anybody else. Like, you're one of the few people I would ever meet with. So and we went out for coffee because they do in-house 1 to 2 days a week. And then I went to Lifeway, and Lifeway doesn't even have offices. They literally built a campus during COVID and sold their big offices downtown in Nashville. They built a campus with no offices. So literally it's just a bunch of big open rooms and spaces that you can gather for large meetings, but you can also find a nook or cranny to sit in and work in. So they have no individual office spaces, even down to the CEO. I actually love that model. It's great. I think that's the way of the future with the mobility of everything. And so we had some great meetings. We talked about a lot of projects for authors I represent and got some updates on the industry. And we were talking about one of the things when it comes to industry is like, I get asked a lot, should I go to a writer's conference? And my answer as an agent is you should only go to a writer's conference. Um, there's lots of different reasons people go to writers conference. If you're a beginning writer who doesn't know anything, writers conferences are great because you learn a lot of information. It's like drinking from a fire hose. It's just like massive amount of information. It overwhelms your brain and you learn a lot. But once you've learned what you need to know to be able to write a book, whether it's fiction, nonfiction, children's, then writers conferences really become about networking and about selling. And if you are not going to network and sell at a conference, I don't think they intrinsically have value. I think it becomes a club where you go and you hang out with people that you know and you like, and that's fine if that's what you want it to be. It's a community. But if you're looking to sell, then I think the investment in a conference is a business investment in trying to sell your product. And when I was sitting with these editors, they don't go to conferences anymore. One, because most of them stopped going because their publishers told them to stop during COVID. And then after COVID, it's become a budgetary restriction because all of these publishers are struggling. They're all reducing the number of books that they're putting out annually. And so they've reduced staff. Like one of the editors I met with used to have 5 editors on staff, and now there's one. She's the only one. She's like, I honestly don't even know what's going to happen to my imprint in a year. So, like, that's the reality of the industry. Even though we all talked about how the industry is good and sales are good, sales have been going up for the biggest names. So the rich are getting richer, which means the top 5% are selling extensively more books than they've ever sold before. But that means the other 95% are not selling as much per capita. So although the overall number is going up in sales and the profitability is going up in sales for a lot of publishers, it's that top 5% is just selling more. Because if you walk around and look at the shelf space, you see less overall books, but you see usually mostly big name authors and celebrity authors or somebody who's already established in the industry. And so they're getting that valuable shelf space. So they're getting more sales because there's less options for a lot of buyers. Now, that may be different like in Barnes and Noble, but it's definitely not in the big box stores such as Walmart, Meijer, Target, Costco, Sam's Club. They have all reduced their size of their um, I guess overall section of their publishing. Now they may have bigger aisles now of publishing and books, but they don't necessarily have a high diversity of books. And so it's a lot of the similar authors who have already successful carrying full series, and because they don't want to have books that they have to return, and publishers don't like to get returns. So that's kind of the big picture, the high altitude view. But let's talk about some more specifics. When I was at Killer Nashville, we taught a session on, I taught with another agent who I hadn't ever met before. He and I taught just an open session on like what to know before you sign a book deal, before you get a book deal. And it was just a transparent conversation with authors about the ins and outs and the dangers of publishing and why you need agents, what agents do, ultimately how contracts work, which is whatever people wanted to ask. And I think everybody walked out and I was like, that's the best session here. And because it was very practical, very useful, and we shared some insights into the whys and of how things work, because I think you need to know the whys and hows that things work to fully understand like how your book is getting viewed. And the one thing, I got some time to talk to the agent right after our session, and we both clearly shared the same thought with each other. We have to, as agents, reject really good manuscripts all the time. There are people who are great writers who you just can't represent because maybe they've written something that's just like something that's come out recently or something that's very popular in the market. It's not different enough to find its own place. That maybe it's the wrong time for the market. It might be it's just not the network that I have. I might look at it and say, this is great, but I just don't have the network of editors to sell this project. And so, like, for example, the other agent has been doing this, I don't know, 20, 30 years, has been an agent a lot longer than I have. And that agent has never sold a book to Penguin, any Penguin imprints. And Penguin's got 80 imprints now. And so that's a lot of imprints on a lot of editors that this agent has ever worked with. And he's like, well, what about you? We've sold close to 10 books to Penguin imprints in the last 5 years. And so we just have different networks of people. And so that's part of how this works, is that agent was basically saying, you might have a really good book. I just may not be the person to sell it. And so I may have to reject you, but does not mean that you're necessarily a bad author or a bad writer. And so part of the process of why you need an agent in the industry, and this is just someone who is an agent, but also is an author, is because in the general market, agents are the gatekeepers. As staffing gets less at each house and they have less and less editors, they rely more and more on people who they see as gatekeepers or experts to bring them high quality work that's targeted for exactly what they're looking for, so that every time they're opening an email to look at something, they're not wasting time. And not saying that just looking at authors writing is wasting time, but for an editor who has to acquire 30 good titles a year, they don't really have time to read 3,000 titles that don't work. They need to look at 100 titles, 150 titles a year from agents that they know and respect, and pick the best and the brightest of all of them that they think they can put in the market, because they don't have time to be a feedback source. And one of the things I think that authors expect is that they're going to get feedback from agents and they're going to get feedback from editors. They're going to look at your manuscript and they're going to give you feedback. And the truth is, that's not the job of an agent. That's not the job of an editor. It is the job of the writer to figure out that process. And so what an agent does is really opens the gates for you to their network of connections that they have navigated. Like for me, I was in Nashville, and in front of one of my top authors, the two of the editors basically said, you're like the only guy that we ever meet with or would meet with, like, because of who you are. And so that's a huge win for me with one of my authors, to hear that, like, they respect me to that level that they would take time to meet with me when they're not meeting with anyone else. And it's because I've spent the time to network, to connect, to build those relationships to the point which um, I can sell books on behalf of my clients. And so that's why in the industry you want to have someone who's networking for you, because it's hard to network for your own. Like, and I'll be honest, my author's like, how are your books doing? I'm like, I don't sell my books because I don't have time. And it feels disingenuous to work to try to sell my own books when I represent so many other books that are great books too. And so it's really hard to do that. And so you have to have somebody who is the cheerleader for your project. And it really is hard to be that for that to be you, because it feels like you're self-serving when you're doing that. I know it feels that way when you're doing it, but also on the receiving end, you may think you're the best salesman for your book, but generally someone who is an expert who also thinks your work is really good can be even a better person to sell your work, because they don't have as much skin in the game. It's not their thing. They're just really promoting it because they think it really is that good of a work and should find a place in the publishing industry. And so that's what agents help with. You don't need that in every aspect of the industry, for sure. For those of you who write like the religious industry, you can work directly with religious houses kind of on your own. But again, most of the big houses that have religious imprints, such as like Thomas Nelson, Zondervan, Waterbrook, those houses are going to be secular houses that have religious imprints who are going to require you to work with an agent. So the higher you want to achieve in the industry, the bigger contracts you want to get, the bigger houses, the more likely you'll have to have an agent. But you can do it on your own. And so that was part of what we had shared in our class, which I think was so helpful, was the difference in the styles of publishing that are popular right now. And what does that mean for you as an author? And you're welcome to ask any questions in the chat if you want me to expound on something. But the big thing we talked about is the rise in hybrid publishing. And I know hybrid publishing is something that drives me nuts. So I don't have a lot of respect for hybrid publishing right now, because I think in a lot of ways it's just a ripoff for authors. But the other agent was just as frustrated as me, if not more, about hybrid publishing. And so, and that was an agent that generally does general market books only. And just like that, like it's the biggest issue in publishing right now is hybrid publishing, fusion publishing, vanity publishing, whatever you want to call it. It is a significant opportunity for publishing houses to make profit on the back of an author, not on the back of sales. And as an author, you want your publisher to make money selling your book, that you don't want them to make money on contracting you and taking your money. And so that's one of the cautions we gave to collectively together to the crowd, was that's a dangerous thing. And there's a very limited number of people which hybrid publishing would be good for it, but it's really restricted to people who have a lot of extra money that they don't mind departing from and never seeing again, and never seeing a return on. And if you have that fall in that category, we just have a lot of extra thousands of dollars in cash that you don't ever want to see again, then hybrid publishing may be good for you, because it'll give you a good product that you don't need to necessarily sell to survive, to make an income on, to provide for your future. But if that's not the case, if that's not the case, then maybe that's not for you. We talked about small publishers, and collectively the agent and I both said we steer clear of all small publishers now. Small publishers since COVID. Before COVID, small publishers could find a place in the industry to make profit. Since COVID, I think for me, small publishers have really been nothing but a problem, because they underdeliver, they overpromise, they make a lot of frustrated clients. And whereas before COVID, they generally could find a way to maybe get some sales. Now I just don't see any real sales out of small publishers, and it is not worth the time and investment for an agent to be involved in any deal with a small publisher. And for example, I've got clients that make like 43 cents on a 6-month royalty. That's at a small publisher, because this publisher's not doing any marketing, not doing any sales. And so ultimately those small publishers, you just can't continue to navigate those relationships with. And so the advice really is to look for independent publishing houses, mid-sized publishing houses, and then the large publishing houses. The large publishing houses are pretty easy. They are HarperCollins, they are Penguin Random House, they are Hachette, they are Simon and Schuster, and I'm missing one. I'll figure it out. There's 5. And so there's 5 large publishers. I'll figure out the next one. But those are what you focus on, and that's the big houses. And each of those houses have many imprints. A lot of them have purchased new companies. Like Sourcebooks was an independent house that was just I think recently Penguin bought 50%, and then just the news, just Penguin just bought a higher percentage of the ownership of it. So now it's essentially Penguin house. And so there's been a lot of consolidation in the industry over the last few years. And so if you're trying to attain that level of publishing, there's a bigger pool of publishers, but there's also a harder opportunity. It's harder to get in because there's more people trying to vie for those spots because everybody wants to go to the big houses. Independent publishers would be publishers like Kensington, Grey Wolf, Skyhorse, publishers like that kind of fall into intermediary, like large, independent. They're not owned by the big 5 essentially. And so those are publishers that you want to aim for. And then a lot of the religious publishers will be considered large independent publishers like Tyndale, Baker, Harvest House, Kriegel. Let's see who else. I'm missing one. Lifeway, B&H Books. So those would be some of the publishers to be aware of. And so those are the publishing houses that are out there. And so now what's popular in the market when it comes to these publishers is the big question is like, what do you do? How do you get an agent? That's always a question people ask me. How do you get an agent? The simple thing is you pitch an agent, you send them an email. I use Query Tracker. I like Query Tracker. It's a website. If you're trying to work in the general market with most agents, then they're going to use something like Query Tracker, which is a submissions network that you can submit to them. You can actually find them on there. You can submit to them. They have guidelines. They have times that they're open and closed. So you can use Query Tracker. You can go to their website and you can pitch them directly. I would say if you're pitching an agent, then you do exactly what they say to, because there are some people who are letter of the law type people. And if you don't do exactly what they say, they won't. It's a rejection. If they tell you they only want a query letter, don't send them a proposal. Send them a query letter. If they tell you they want a full proposal, don't send a query letter without a full proposal. If they tell you they want the full manuscript, don't send 3 chapters. Send the full manuscript. Because what happens is I've looked at books before and like the 3 chapters were good, and I requested the full manuscript. I'm like, well, I haven't read any yet. So because they only read 3 chapters. Well, I can't do anything with 3 chapters of a fiction book. I need the entire book 100% done before I can do anything with it. And so agents, we get used to those things. So ultimately, if you pitch a partial project, and I may not take the time to find out if there's more, if I've asked you for the whole thing up front. And so that's how other agents also operate. And so you just need to be aware of, follow the rules, pitch agents. If you can pitch editors, just follow their guidelines too. Like, don't try to be the rule breaker thinking that it's cute or clever. It doesn't always work. I will tell you though that I keep this over here for times like this. Let's see. I had a creative pitch. Let me see if I can find it. Somebody sent me a creative pitch the other day. Where did I put it? I have it. I left it here I thought I left it on so I could show you guys. So somebody sent me an envelope that was like custom made envelope. I must have put something else. And it was like they took not newspaper, they took magazine pictures and made their own envelope for it and sent it to me. It was creative. I did keep the envelope because I thought, it's creative. I didn't do anything with the submission because ultimately, although it was a creative envelope, it didn't change that it wasn't a submission I was looking for. But I did think it was creative, so I did keep the envelope. I wish I could show it to you. I'm gonna find it right after we get done filming because I literally just saw it the other day. I was saving it for you guys, but So sometimes that creative stuff, it works. Sometimes it doesn't. I would say more often than not, just follow the rules. Don't think that you're the creative exception. My favorite way to find clients is in person at conferences because I get to know them. I get to meet them. I know I put a face and name together. And so that's the easiest way. Genuinely, when I'm at a conference, I have a lot of extra time in the evenings where I don't have anything to do. So like my family's not there. I'm usually in another place like Nashville, and I just have time to take a look at something if I'm bored. And oftentimes I'll just go over any submissions that maybe piqued my interest as I was talking with people and take a deeper dive. And so that's what I did in Nashville. Like I'd go to my room and I'd have extra hours. So I just kind of look over some of the submissions and see if anything kept me reading. And so that's a good opportunity to pitch people as at a conference when you can have the time to talk with them. So if you can find an agent or an editor at a conference, it's a great opportunity for you to go to a conference and pitch them directly. You're going to find in the general market, you're not really going to find many editors ever show up these days. It's going to be agents everywhere. And so because those are your gatekeepers, that's how you get in. And you pitch the agents just like you would pitch a publishing house. You want to pitch an agent because that agent can make or break whether you can get through the doors at some of these publishers. And so you'll do that. And then if not, I would encourage you to wait. If you don't have conferences with agents that represent what you're writing, don't think that every agent represents the same thing. Like I did not represent any of the same stuff that other agent represented. So we were not competition. Like his network of people, we had like one person in common, but I don't represent that one person. We've both been in the same office in New York City for Kensington Publishing, meeting with the same editor, but for totally different reasons. And that the editor is like the senior editor, so he's over the whole division. But the acquisitions editors we work with are different because they acquire different things. So like we weren't really competitions. We just kind of laughing about how the network is not as big as you think it is. Like we all know the same people, but we don't all work with the same people, if that makes sense. And so it was kind of funny to talk with him. Again, feel free to ask any questions if you want in the chat, if you want any more specific details. But right now, today, so let's kind of give you the groundwork to get into like where are we seeing now that you know like kind of that process, who you should pitch to, where you should pitch to, how things work. Some of the basics of like what are royalties right now? That's a question I get asked a lot. Like what royalties are you seeing right now? Now, this is a varied category because royalties in picture books are very different than royalties in fiction books. And royalties in fiction books can be different than royalties in nonfiction books to a degree. Those are more similar. But also, ebook royalties are much different than print book royalties. Paperback royalties are different than mass market royalties. Hardback royalties are much different than all of them. And then you've got royalties on your sub rights, which are all the other rights. Your foreign language rights are different. So all of those categories have different royalty rates depending on the situation, the price point of your book. There's a lot of variables. And then when you look at publishing, the big thing that most people don't know is not all royalties rates are the same. In the general market, most royalties are calculated off the gross. And in the religious market, most royalties are calculated off the net. It's also very similar in small publishers and in hybrid publishers that royalties are calculated off the net of the book. There's a significant difference between gross royalties off the gross and royalties off the net. I'll explain it. So if royalties are based off the gross of a book, that means they're based off of retail price. So I'll pull a book off my shelves. Here's a book. Let's see if I got all right. This is a book from St. Martin's Press. It's called Surrounded by Idiots. So this book retails at $17.99. It's a disc profile, personally profile book. It retails at $17.99. So if I have a royalty on this book as an author, I would get paid my royalty on $17.99. So if I got a 10% royalty, I would make $1.79 per book. That's the gross price. Maybe that's what people think. but that's not necessarily the case, because the gross is not necessarily this retail price. It's the gross price that the publisher sold the book for, which is usually a 40% discount from that price point, because they sell it when your publisher sells the book, they sell it to the retailer, and they usually sell it at a 40% discount or 50% discount, depending on the publisher. So 40%, let's do some math here. I'm just going to bump this up to $18 because that makes my math easier. So my dogs are attacking each other and the other way. All right. So let's see, $18 times 0.4 equals $7.20 discount on this book. That's what it would be. So 18 minus 7.2 equals $10.80. So if I had a 10% royalty in this book, I would make $1.08 off this book. That's how I would make a royalty. That's if I had a 10% royalty. Now, if I had a 15% royalty, it'd be, you take that and do it by 15%, which would be $1.63 or something like that, $1.70 on the book. If I had a 20% royalty, it'd be, $2.16 per book. And that's the way it works if it's gross. If it's net, here's the problem. And here's one of the reasons I don't like to work with hybrids and small publishers. If it's net, for publishers that do net and only net off of the sale price, then it would be whatever they sold it. For some of them might be gross before the discount. It might be, if you can get it off retail price gross, that'd be awesome. But for the net, some of these will have like cost of shipping will come out of their net. So there'll be the cost of the book minus the discount, the cost of shipping, holdover for returns, and then the net of that, there'll be a percentage of. So let's just say with shipping, with sometimes they take print price out of it. So let's just say it would half it to $5 a book. And if you got 10% of that, you'd make 50 cents a book. So it can be significantly difference between the gross and net. A lot of times when you have publishers who base their royalties off the net, they give a higher royalty rate to offset the reduction of the price of the overall sale of the book. So I tend to find in some, like, for example, if I'm doing a contract with like, say one of the big five, I might get a 10% royalty on a fiction, but I might get an 18 or 20% royalty on that same fiction in the religious market, because the religious market will base it off net price and the general market will base it off the gross price. So it's less, but it ends up being right about the same for those kind of independent religious publishers and the large publishers, the differences. But when it comes to small publishers and it comes to hybrid publishers, that net is usually net all expenses. But a lot of those they will make the net almost zero to where they're making no profit, because they'll take building overhead out of the net. They'll set aside a percentage for like a price per book for each to cover overhead, to cover salaries, to cover staff, to cover all those things. And so what they do is they take that net price down to such a small percentage, you might get 20% of nothing. And so you look at your royalty statement, you're like, why did I only make like 4 cents on this copy? It's because the net price was reduced so much because that publisher was able to take out whatever they want out of the net price. And so a good contract will make sure to clearly communicate what comes out of the net. What are the deductions coming from? Like, you want to know, if you're signing a contract with a small, medium-sized publisher or a hybrid publisher, you want to know if it's net, your advances or your royalties are off the net price, then what is considered the expenses that go into determining the net. Now, I know if there's anybody in here who's published with those publishers before, you're probably having a heart attack because you probably never thought to look at that contract. But you've also probably been frustrated about why you're getting such low royalties when you thought you were going to get more. And it's because the net price, they're taking whatever they want to take out of it. And unless your contract delineates what they're allowed to take out of that and what they're not, then they can pretty much determine whatever they want for them. within what they would say within reason. And that's a scary thing. And so if you're signing contracts, you need to know the differences. This is why it's helpful to have representation, to know these things, to look at these things. But if that's not making sense, let me know. But I'm trying to help you kind of see with a practical book. I like gross royalty contracts, even though the percentage that we get is a lot smaller from big publishers. You still make more. So generally, you usually make more with a gross rate contract than you will with a net rate contract. And so that's what you'll see. For the most part, in publishing these days, when it comes to royalties, let's just say that we're going to say the general market, 7.5 to 15% royalties, somewhere in that range, is a normal thing. If you're talking children's publishing, then you could be down in the 4 to 10% range, depending. Children's rates are usually a lot less because they're usually offering part of the royalties to the illustrator in a lot of instances. So the illustrator is essentially splitting your royalty with you. So whereas you might see, you might normally think you might get an 8% royalty, you might get 4 because they're offering 4% to a children's book illustrator as well. So that sometimes is how it works. And that's just, you make a lot less in children's because of that. Ebook royalties are pretty standard right now. We usually see about 25% of what an ebook sells for that you'll get in the industry. And if you're doing self-publishing, it's all really set by Amazon. There's no negotiations. So it's whatever Amazon tells you. Currently, I think it's 70% royalties if you're over $2.99 and 35% below that. Yeah, makes sense. Advances vary. One of the things we were able to do at this conference was talk about like the advance, excuse me, talk about the advances at like a big publisher like Penguin in fiction and like what the advances are. And I mean, Penguin is like the #1 publishing house in the world right now. And so their advances are usually quite large. They had categories for advances that the editors can offer, starting with like 25,000 to 50,000, 50,000 to 100,000, 100,000 to 150,000, 150,000 to 250,000. And all of it is based on the number of books that they believe that they're going to sell in the first year. And so if they believe a book is going to sell like 25,000 copies to 50,000 copies, they usually are going to offer something like a $25,000 to $50,000 advance. That's kind of going to be the range, because if you look at the royalties and they're going to offer maybe a 10% royalty on a book that sells for $17.99, the author's going to make about $1 a book. So if they believe it's going to sell for 25,000 copies, they're really secure in that, then they're going to offer a $25,000 advance because it's an advance against royalties. And so they might offer a little less. If that 25,000 is low for a lot of those publishers, that's like the beginning of starting to be mildly successful. So you might see less than a $25,000 advance for that. But all they're doing is, it's not like you make your advance. And this is probably the biggest misnomer. Most authors think they're going to get an advance and then they immediately start making royalties. That is not the case. An advance is always an advance against the royalties. You get an advance payment and then you have to earn that out, which means you have to sell enough books to get the advance paid off. If essentially they're giving you a loan against your royalties, your future royalties. 80% of books don't earn out their advance. Most authors never get royalty payments. That is a thing. And it's always frustrating for authors that they always think there's going to be all these royalty checks come in, because that's what we see in movies and that's what we hear about in the big success stories. That is for the 20% who have books that are overachieving, to say. Most authors just get their advance and there's never another dollar that comes in. If you do start receiving royalties, it's wonderful, because it means your book is usually achieving beyond what your publisher believed it was going to go past. So, oh, I got a question. Here we go. Let's see. Do you have a good resource on how to write a nonfiction proposal and how to find an agent for nonfiction? I mean, we are a good resource. We have lots of videos on that with Serious Writer, how to write a nonfiction proposal. Um, so there are, I could probably find you a link to a good one online. How to find an agent for nonfiction. So that's a good question. There's not a lot of nonfiction conferences these days. Everybody wants to write fiction. So generally, you're going to find a fiction conference that teaches you to write nonfiction proposals mixed in with fiction writers. You're going to find a more generic conference, just like a writers conference. At Killer Nashville, they did not have much nonfiction at all. It's a fiction conference. Although I found some nonfiction there, and they did have a nonfiction category in their competition. There was barely any nonfiction. So that's not the place to go. But agents for nonfiction is the best place for agents to make money. So, um, so if you write a great nonfiction, there are agents who love to represent it because it's often the easiest way for an agent to make money is because it doesn't have to be completely written until it's sold. I've sold a bunch of nonfiction this year. It's been great. But I'm usually selling it off a proposal and 2 sample chapters, and instead of a 100,000 word manuscript. So nonfiction is a lot easier for agents to work with. And so the best way is to pitch. If you have a good idea, you can pitch nonfiction agents. Do Query Tracker is a good way. I'll put Query Tracker in the chat for you guys. I think it's .net. You can find nonfiction agents on there. You can also do mswl.com, which is manuscript wish list. You can find agents looking for nonfiction there. Not as many. You're going to find mainly on that. It's going to be more like fiction agents. Fiction agents are like, it's like what's always in vogue. Everybody wants to be a fiction writer, the next novelist. But oftentimes nonfiction brings the steadiest incomes for agents. So I don't know if that's not answering your question, ask me a follow-up. But I'm trying to think of a good nonfiction conference, just nonfiction. I can't think of any just nonfiction conference. Usually it's just if it's a writers conference, that's not a genre specific. Like there's some like Realm Makers is like a speculative conference, and there's Killer Nashville, which is a thriller suspense writers conference. Those are not a good place to find. Romance Writers of America, not a good place because that's fiction. That's a genre conference. But if you can find just a general writers conference that agents of nonfiction show up. I got a resource. I like doing writing day workshops. I'm friends with the owner there. He used to be the Writer's Digest editor for a long time, and he does 1-day writers conferences all over the country. He usually brings in 7 to 10 agents at each one. The only thing I would say is if you're looking to sell nonfiction, make sure there's nonfiction agents coming. Not every agent does nonfiction. Most agents that start get into fiction. I don't know why. It's a thing. Like everybody wants to be the next Harry Potter. So, but they all want to come in and do fiction. So make sure you'll usually can find the bios for the agents and make sure they represent nonfiction if you're going to invest in doing one of those. But those usually come to all major cities in all regions throughout the year. I think he does 20 or 30 of them across the country. All right. How much consideration from Janet do publishers give the endorsement section in a book proposal? And how does one go about securing stronger or more endorsements to carry? Oh, that's actually a really good question. I mean, I give it nothing. So, and here's why. Everybody picks people I've never heard of for endorsements. And if I've never heard of them, they're not going to sell any of your books. Endorsements matter when those people are going to deliver you sales. If you don't have an endorsement from somebody that's going to deliver sales for your book, it doesn't carry any weight to me as an agent or to the publisher, unless that endorsement some from somebody very famous they can put on the cover. But the reason they're going to put that famous person's name on the cover is because they believe that famous person's name is going to sell books. Everything with an endorsement has to do with selling books. If that person is not going to deliver thousands of sales because they're endorsing it, they're not going to have any real weight for you in the process. You still need to have the endorsement section though, because they want to know that you can go get endorsements. So it's a catch 22. But yeah, so if you've got like somebody famous that's in the news, if you've got Dwayne the Rock Johnson will endorse your book, that would probably mean something. People would check it out because of that. If you've got Bob Johnson, my next door neighbor, who's also a writer, not gonna matter. So just be aware that that's how it is viewed. How do you get endorsements? I was actually talking about this in Nashville with an author who is writing I can't tell you what he's writing, but he's writing a book and he's like, well, how do I get endorsements? He was asking me. I was like, essentially go to Chat GPT, tell them what your book's about and tell them give me 3 endorsements for my book, which is about this, and it'll write 3 endorsements for you. Take those 3 endorsements and send to the people you want to endorse your book and say, hey, I have drafted 3 potential endorsements for my book. Would you be willing to endorse my book? You can use one of these drafted endorsements, or you can tweak it to be in your own words and you can send it back to me. Just let me know. I'd love to have you endorse my book. What often happens is the person will say, number 2 is great. Go with that. I'd love to endorse your book. It's that simple. It happens all the time. If you ask people to write the endorsement themselves, I see a less than 5% return on that, because people have good intentions and they might say they will, but they never sit around actually reading your book and or endorsing it. And truthfully, I'd like to say that people who endorse books read them, but some do. I think the most don't, especially when they come to celebrities. My experience is celebrities don't read the endorsements. Usually maybe they had a staff person who fell in love with something and read it and then tell them about it. And I'll put my name on that. But it's often they may read a portion of it, but my experience is they don't typically seem to read it. They just pick an endorsement out of it. It's a business thing for a lot of these people. It's a connection networking thing. And so that'd be my advice. You could write 3 endorsements yourself if you think you do better. But my advice to this guy was just go Chat GPT, 3 endorsements, potential endorsements for your books, describe what your book's about. You can put in your elevator pitch, have it spit out some. If you like them, send them to this person or this person. And he needed to send his to a bunch of attorneys, famous attorneys. He like the Johnny Cochran guy, some people who had represented famous cases. He was trying to get endorsements for his book. He actually knows them personally. And I'm like, yeah, go get their endorsements. That would be good. The person that did the Johnny Depp trial recently was somebody he's connected to. I was like, yeah, go get that endorsement. You can put that in the front cover of your book. And so he was going to work on that. So yeah. You spent enough money on fiction conferences for your fiction book. Yeah. Like listen, I love conferences. I just think they're not worth the money these days. I just don't. Like, I'm somebody who got my start because I really wanted to go to a conference I read about as a kid in Writer's Digest. I would buy Writer's Digest when I was a wannabe teenage writer, and I always dreamed of going to this writer's conference. And so I always said one day I want to go. Well, what happened is my wife and we lost our first kid. And so after that, I really got back into writing just because I was processing through that grief, right? And my wife's like, why don't you just go to that conference? So I actually went to that conference, this thing I'd always talked about, kind of dreamed about doing. And it was great. I won a bunch of awards there over the period of 3 years. And then it ended up that's how I became an agent. And so the conference thing for me was wonderful. It's how I learned everything to get me into the industry, get me started, to get me to know how to write. It was perfect for me. But there came a point in time when I recognized the investment in conferences wasn't fruitful anymore. It was more just a community I was paying to go be part of, and I wasn't getting anything out of it. And so I quit paying to go to conferences. Now, as an agent, I get paid to go to conferences, but I even recognize I've been going to a lot less conferences the last few years because it hasn't even been worth my time as going, because I'm not finding people that I can sell. And that's not because I don't find good writers. I have to have people who can sell books at this point. And you have to be able to not only say you can sell, but you have to prove an ability to sell books and have a proven buying audience, whether or not you're already selling books. You got to have people who buy. And that's generally what I'm looking for. That's what usually publishers tell me they're looking for. That's what I heard in Nashville over and over again. Platform, platform, platform. People that can sell books, people who are famous. That's what they're looking for. I'm going to Grand Rapids next week to meet with a couple publishers. They're going to tell me similar. So, and so that's kind of the things to be aware of. There are opportunities for people who are debut, but they're very, very small, very narrow windows. And there are opportunities, more so in things that are felt needs. That's the best place to break in, is felt needs into the market, if you're writing a felt need book. And I really think that's in children's, adult fiction, and adult nonfiction, but got to write about felt needs, things that are just perennial sellers, because we need that stuff. We need that content. You use Query Tracker. Great. Yeah. Use Query Tracker for nonfiction too. It works. Right. Oh, you've been to Railmakers. Okay. Awesome. Writer's Digest boot camp. Oh yeah. I used to love Writer's Digest. I mean, I was so sad when it started to go bankrupt and got bought out. Yeah. Yeah. I agree. Writers must be business owners. Yeah. I mean, I think your writing is a hobby and writing is a business. I think if you want to sell your book and be a writer who's an author who's published by a traditional publishing house, you got to quit treating it as a hobby and start treating it as a business. And I think the problem is most writers don't make that transition. They still think of it as this hobby, this thing I enjoy doing, and they don't treat it like a business. I mean, if you're here with us, you obviously treat it like a business. You're investing in it. And so that's why we try to be as transparent as we can. I'm telling you the same thing I've told my clients this week. So that I've had like 3 or 4 phone calls, and I've just said, hey, this is some stuff that updated. And so like, just be aware it's kind of part of the process. Don has a rule, unless I have implemented my takeaway always from last conference, I would not go next. And that's a good one. That's a good one. Yeah. I mean, I think that's fair. If you didn't use what you paid all that money for, don't pay all that money for more stuff you're not going to use. That's very good. Can I email you separately about a potential nonfiction type title that I want to market to household for Christian college, seminaries, and divinity schools? I have self-published many times before, but I believe this book really warrants an agent market I want to reach. It's also very good for church and nonprofit leaders. Yeah, you get, I mean, the best way to send it to me is send it to me through Query Tracker and just say you're part of Serious Writer Club in the subject line. Yep, that's the easiest way. I use that to keep track of everything. That's how I love it, because I don't, I have it. It keeps everything organized for me, and it's not in my email inbox, because my email inbox gets hundreds and hundreds of emails a day, and it gets packed. So I just spend all my time weeding through it. So Query Tracker keeps it all nice and organized for me, and it's only authors that use that. So it's not spam from companies and people spamming me with stuff, newsletters and that kind of thing. Felt needs. Yes. Can I explain felt needs? Okay. Felt needs are, if I'm grieving, I'm going to buy books about grief. It's felt need. If I want to lose weight, I'm going to buy books on dieting. Felt need. If I'm anxious, I'm going to buy books about anxiety. Felt need. If I'm struggling to have focus, I might buy books on mindfulness. That's a felt need. If it's Christmas time, I'm going to buy Christmas books for my kids. It's Christmas, it's seasonal, but it's a felt need. I need more Christmas stuff at Christmas time. So it's felt need, seasonal. I think seasonal falls into felt need categories. I think color books for children fall into felt needs categories. I want to spend time loving my kid. So I bought this book so we could sit down together and hold them in my lap and love them. Felt need. Helps us connect. So, oh yeah, felt needs are everything. Children's, I mean, I was with a children's editor who told me felt needs. Then I was with a YA middle grade and children's editor who talked about felt needs in fiction and nonfiction. And then I know I saw a lot of adult fiction, and nonfiction outside of that. So, and we always look for felt needs. You won't see felt needs categories in Barnes and Noble. It won't say felt needs. Maybe it will. I don't know. Let me see if I can find Barnes and Noble categories. Let me see if there's a list of them somewhere. I can tell you which ones are kind of felt needs. Barnes and Noble. Let's see. I'm looking. Book categories. Dun, dun, dun. Discover categories. Yeah, here we go. All right, let's see if it has it here. Barnes and Noble, Books A Million, any of the bookstores. Let's see. Okay, so felt needs. Here's one you might not think about. I'm a terrible leader. Buy a book on leadership. Felt need, right? So, I mean, those are things like anything that answers a problem. Felt need. Anything that answers any kind of problem. Or I think people will call seasonal, but I also think it's a felt need because like publishers need to have more seasonal titles every year. They're always looking for Christmas, always looking for Easter, always looking for seasons. Books that have to do with seasons, connect to seasons. We talked about that last time. And so felt needs. Um, yeah, so I'm trying to see fiction, literature. Let's see. Uh, Fiction can be felt needs. Um, Especially like women's fictions, a lot of women's fiction deal with felt needs. The things that like there are books about that fiction books that talk about grief. And so sometimes people don't want to read a book about grief. They might want to read a story about someone overcoming grief or working through grief. And so they'll go to a fiction and read it, but they still felt need, still addressing a felt need. And so you can have a lot of times, like Inside Out 2 was a movie about anxiety. That's a felt need. So, but it's fiction, and that was for kids. So that's the kind of explanation of felt needs. I think that's all the questions. Yeah. So I know I'm running long. I've been running long. So, I just get talking, but, yeah, thanks for listening. We'll have more. I'm actually heading out in the morning to North Carolina for an event, for a conference. So, um, yeah, so I'll actually going to connect with a couple of editors while I'm there. So it'll be good. We got a couple going to be on faculty with us and a marketing specialist. So probably have more information for you soon, from that, as well as I head next week for some more meetings. So hopefully middle of next week. I don't know if I'll get to those other meetings in Grand Rapids, before next Wednesday's call, but if I don't, I'll kind of a full breakdown for you guys from what those publishers are looking for in 2 weeks for you guys. And then I'm also heading to Chicago for some meetings here in the next month. So it's going to be really exciting. And then the plan is, at the end of September, I'm heading to New York City to meet with some publishers. So I'm already in the process trying to set those up. So we'll have kind of a breakdown probably early October from um, the New York publishing meeting. So it's an exciting time to meet with publishers again, kind of get a lot of submissions out here this fall. And we get to tell directly to you guys what I'm learning. So it can help you in your own writing, your own pitching, as you kind of can continue to venture on through this industry. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And, yeah, if you got more questions on this, bring them next week. So if this makes you think about some things, just come back next week and ask the questions. We'll stay and answer them. We'll try to help you out as best we can. That's what we're here for. So until then, we'll see you next week. Bye.